AskReddit Storytime. Please like and subscribe. What is the scariest encounter with another human you have ever experienced? My cousin, who was like 14, was babysitting us, 9-year-old me, 4-year-old brother. Her dad called coming down from "I wanna say crack? Heroin? I'd something real bad." He called and screamed at her to tell him where her piggy bank was. She told him to duck off and hung up. He called back, she didn't pick up, and he left a voice message which played as he was leaving it, saying basically he was gonna come down there and ducking murder all of us, with a knife. He was gonna come down there and duck and kill us all. He was full of shit, but we were terrified. Can you imagine the pure fear a 9-year-old feels when a grown man who sounds crazy says he's going to murder her with a knife? So we prepared. We blocked out the windows, locked everything, put heavy furniture in front of the doors. My brother was asleep in his room. My cousin told me just leave him, but I couldn't stand the thought of him being alone in there, so I covert-style belly crawled, heart beating out of my chest, across the kitchen, through the living room to his room, scooped him up, and brought him back to my mom's room, which we then barricaded ourselves into. I got no sleep that night, and my mom and my aunt came back the next morning like, "What the duck did you kids do?" But I was honestly just happy to be alive and that my mom was home again. The worst part of the whole thing is when she got home, her dad had sold all of her belongings. I mean everything, her bed, her dresser, TV, it was all gone. It was just an empty room. He's clean now, but I still hate his ducking guts. Duck you, Uncle Donald. When I was 15, I regularly was at home by myself since both of my parents worked full-time and my brother had moved away to college. Well, one day during the summer I was just relaxing at home, when all of a sudden someone knocks on the front door. I get up and check the people, and see 2 guys just standing in the driveway just off the porch. One of them wearing a suit, the other wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, but facing away from the house like he's playing lookout. I decide to ignore them, cause they'll go away, right? Wrong. They continue knocking, but getting progressively louder and more aggressive. Finally, I decide to call the sheriff's department and ask for a non-emergency check since they're trespassing. My dumbass decides to yell through the door that I had called, and before I can even realize how dumb it is, the guy starts kicking the front door. I freak the duck out, run back toward the center of the house and realize that there's a third guy trying to kick in the back door as well. At this point I call 911 and start screaming about these 3 guys trying to break into my house. Notoriously, it took the sheriff's deputies longer to get there than anyone would imagine, and they see the guys walking down the road later. Stopped them to question, but no arrest. A delivery driver I used to work with pointed a gun at my head as I was bending down to get something from the cooler I was working near. I cracked a joke about him, honestly forget what, and when I stood up I felt it at my temple. He started laughing and I laughed it off too, got him his order ASAP, and when he left I went home and called my boss, and didn't go back till he was fired. Turns out he killed himself and his baby's mother a few years after that incident. I was driving through a somewhat rough neighborhood at night, late after a movie, and while sitting at a light we saw this guy in a beat-up car take a bump of Coca-Cola next to us. We make eye contact. As the light turns green he merged behind us and then proceeds to follow us around, flashing his lights and honking his horn for several blocks. We pull up to another red light, he pulls up next to us yelling at us to roll down the window. Turns out he just wanted to let us know he had a tail light out and then drove away. When I was 13, I just got dropped off from the school bus, so I had a bit of ways to walk home. As I get close to the corner of my street, some guy in a dark blue car rolls up and asked where I was headed. Told him I was going home. The guy excruciatingly slowed his car down to match my walk and asked if I wanted a ride home. I told him no thanks, I'm almost home. Then he continued to ask where I live and if I still wanted a ride home. Luckily I had a phone at this age, and pulled out my Nokia phone. I remember this, and pretends to call my mom. She wouldn't have picked up the phone and I was almost home. The guy saw what I was doing and sped off like crazy. From the age of 13, I started carrying pepper spray. Late 80s, was running errands in town with my mom and 2 sisters. Back then it wasn't uncommon to leave your kids in the car while you ran inside the store. We are sitting in the car waiting, and then I see an older guy walking towards our car. I just get a really bad feeling and start yelling at my sisters to lock the doors, while I lock the 2 on my side. He comes over and spends the next couple of minutes trying to open all the doors on the car while we are cowering in our seats. Eventually he gave up and left. We were all 8 and under in age at the time. I just knew that if he got in the car he would take one of us. In our mid-20s, my husband and I lived in a townhome without a yard in a pretty nice area of town. We knew we were purchasing a house soon, so we went ahead and got our first puppy. I'm a morning person, whilst my husband is not, so I would usually get up around 5 a.m. and take the puppy out to the little patch of grass across the street from our townhome, still inside the entire complex, mind you. Did this for several months, no big deal. Well, one morning while out waiting on the puppy, an old Ford van, all beat up with no windows, slowly drives by and goes back behind another building. A few minutes later, as I'm getting ready to cross the street and go back inside, the van comes back up the road to where I was getting ready to cross, stops in the middle of the road and turns off its lights. I waved them on in front of me, and at that point, both doors of the van started to open. All I remember was seeing someone start to get out before both the dog and I felt the undeniable urge to run across the street and inside as fast as possible. Once inside, the van sped off and disappeared. The creepiest part of this whole thing was when I went upstairs to wake my husband, only to find out he was in the middle of a dream where I'd been kidnapped. To this day, I refuse to run outside or go on walks alone, even on our quiet country roads. And big old vans still creep me out. In 2012, I was just north of Irwin, Tennessee while through hiking the Appalachian Trail in the Roan Mountain area. While at our campsite, maybe 25 yards off dirt forest trail, a blue F-150 pulls up and a man gets out and says he's an undercover for a stranger. Right, he says there's been a lot of kids causing trouble up around these parts and did we have any guns or drugs? It was myself and another older gentleman from New Orleans who also said he was through hiking and 2 off-duty Coast Guard who were making a weekend hiking trip together. Before that evening none of us had ever met. We discuss and decide that the guy was fairly creepy and decide to split up and scout out maybe a replacement place to camp. We agree to each hike 15 minutes north, south and come back and report if there was a more suitable spot where we were away from the road and the guy would have a harder time finding us. After our little recon trip we come back and decide there really was nothing all that suitable and decide to just push our tents a little deeper into the woods so as to not be spotted as easily. Around 9 p.m., everyone is in bed and asleep or nearly. 3 gunshots ring out and they're not off in the distance in less than 5 minutes. A truck comes screaming down the path with the high beams on and the same guy from earlier gets out, brandishing a Glock with an extended magazine. He's hysterical and tells everyone to get out of their tents and on the ground. For the next nearly 45 minutes he kept up the charade that he was an undercover game warden and/or fish and wildlife person. The story would change. After a few minutes into the ordeal it was fairly obvious he was unstable or on something. That didn't change the fact that he had a gun pointed at us. He would rinse and repeat the same lines over and over. 1. Do you have guns, drugs or money? 2. You don't have cash? How will you survive out here? 3. I'm just trying to keep you guys safe. 4. There's 4 of you and 1 of me. You're going to try and jump me. Swing the gun around and brandish it wildly, rinse and repeat. This whole cycle would usually last 6-8 minutes at a time and nearly the entire 45 minutes we were either laying on our stomachs or on our knees. Fairly early on, the guy from New Orleans jumped up and ran into the woods, found out later with a cell phone, and called the police. They said it would take them about 45 minutes to make it out to the woods and to hold tight. Of course I didn't know any of this. And more importantly, the guy holding us up lost his mind. Undercover man shouted into the woods and said that if New Orleans didn't come back, the rest of us would be sorry. The guy actually came back. Seriously, he didn't know any of us, and even today, I genuinely don't believe if I was in his shoes I would walk back into that situation. It's the bravest thing I've ever seen someone do. The situation ended when the man demanded to search our backpacks for the aforementioned drugs, guns or money. He was kind of easing into stage 3 where he's just trying to keep us safe. He leans down to search my backpack and the 2 Coast Guard guys jump up simultaneously and tackle him. I knocked the gun out of his hand and quickly dropped the mag and discovered that there was a live round in the chamber the whole time. We tied the guy up and waited for the police, who showed up about 20 minutes after. I was incredulous that their response was essentially, "Oh, that's just crazy John, he's really done it this time." Or, "Oh John." They would have been within their rights to shoot you dead. For the record, his name wasn't John, but it was very generic sounding. Here's the best part of the story. There was obviously empty bottles of liquor and a film canister with crushed something in it, and a cell phone with 14 missed calls from his apparent son. While this is being searched, it's explained to me that he was a former minister who got struck by lightning and became a pill popper and kooky ever since. He was known for messing with people, but never to that degree before. I ended up finishing my through hike, but that was without a doubt the scariest thing that happened while I was doing it. AskReddit Storytime. Please like and subscribe.